I'm going to talk to you today about my project, which is called Everything in the Forest is the Forest, which I've been making at BIFoR Face for the last 4 years. So in 2019, I read a government report which said that loneliness and isolation were increasing in rural areas of the UK. And that led me to similar information, like a study by Age UK, which said that for 3.9 million elderly people in the UK, their television is their main company. And at the time, I was also starting to read and understand that in contrast, trees communicate and thrive in sentient communities. I became really interested in this dichotomy between the connectivity of the forest and the loneliness that was reportedly being experienced by people living around the trees. And I wondered, what can we learn from the unity of the forest to improve issues of loneliness in human societies? So, supported by the Grain Bursary Award 2019, I approached Professor Rob Mackenzie at BIFoR Face, who kindly put me in touch with Dr. Chris Hart, who very supportively allowed me access to a beautiful circle of 12 oak trees at BIFoR. And I should say that as a female artist, BIFoR offered me a really safe and secure forest where I felt supported, inspired, and able to be creative. I started visiting the trees as often as I could, and I began to think about why they are so successful at creating and nurturing a community. In Old Growth, Robin Wall Kimmerer says, "We are not trees. We lack their stillness, their presence, the generosity that comes from spinning sunlight to sugar. To stand in stillness for centuries requires ingenuity in harnessing physical forces and genius for collaboration. They learned long ago that the key to life as a sessile being is to cultivate good relationships, that all flourishing is mutual, especially when you can't run away." At school, I'd been taught about nature as being competitive, which is of course true, but I began to think of those trees as constant, steadfast entities encouraging the community around them. I was also thinking a lot about Stephen Gill's incredible project, The Pillar, in which he placed a motion sensor camera on a pillar in his neighbour's field in Sweden and showed us birds in their natural state. Perhaps I didn't always need to be physically present in the space to make images. At the time, my daughter was just 1, and I felt a need to be creative, but also a need to be at home. So on a very sleep-deprived night, I decided I would somehow place cameras onto the trees, almost asking for their permission to hold the cameras for me while I couldn't be there, and to see the world from their perspective. So working with Birmingham City University's STEAM House, I designed and made 24 wooden pinhole cameras, and my new assistant helped me to test them. The cameras resemble bird boxes, and each one contains a single sheet of 5 by 4 inch film that remains in the camera and records the light entering a 0.1 millimeter pinhole to create long exposures. And these can be anywhere from a year long to 4 years long. So in March 2020, during the week just before we went into our first lockdown, I piled them into my car and I worked with tree surgeons, Rob Keyser and his team at BIFoR, to install 2 cameras into each tree, one at ladder height and one at the top. And all of the cameras face in on each other in a circle. These are some of the many long exposures made in the cameras on 5 by 4 inch film, ranging from a year to 4 years. You can see the path of the sun here, so we would say this is a solar graph. And these might seem like a long time for photographic exposures, but really they are just mere heartbeats in the long lives of these oaks, which are currently around 180 years old. They would have been acorns when photography was invented. And again, another solar graph showing the path of the sun from March 2020 to March 2021. When we changed the films in the pinhole cameras, we found that they've become habitats for moths, spiders, and other insects, just as oak trees house countless creatures. Over the past 4 years, I visited the forest regularly to visualise and learn from the tree's intelligent manifestation of community and exchange. I agreed with the team at BIFoR that I wouldn't remove anything from the forest so as not to disrupt its ecosystem. So I've been working with and within the environment, kind of like my studio. And this encouraged me to completely change my practice. And all of the images that you'll see here are from the project, either made by me or by the workshop participants. So through observation and reading, I've learnt that trees instinctively adapt their behaviour to accommodate their changing needs, just as we need to do at all times, but particularly in the global crisis that we're facing now. Every time I go to the forest, I create an image of exactly the same tree from exactly the same location. So there are quite a lot of these now. I've also learnt that although trees appear to be individual entities above ground, in the subterranean world, they connect their roots with fungal networks to share nutrients and information. They identify and nurture their offspring, pass wisdom to their young, and they care for weak trees. They feed themselves and others with the leaves that they shed. Oak trees welcome diversity and recognise how necessary it is for strength and protection in their community. Mature oaks can house up to 2,300 species. When they die, their decay supports their ecosystem for years. It seems they're doing quite a lot of things right, so I've tried to replicate their behaviour in my creative practice and in my life. So when lockdown hit, I called out for people living in the area surrounding the forest and identified 14 from 12 households who were experiencing loneliness or isolation. Feeling lonely or isolated is very subjective, particularly at that time during lockdown. And so it kind of ranged from somebody not seeing anybody apart from me and their Sainsbury's delivery person to having family live in the house with them, but just wanting to make more local connections. Every month I hand delivered the equipment they needed for a series of photography workshops and taught them the techniques I was applying in the forest, including lumen printing, making anther types, soil chromatographs, pinhole photography, and dummy concertina books. Every other month we discussed what we'd made, shared in the ebb and flow that is creativity, whilst keeping each other company. Essentially, we mirrored the behaviour of the trees to be connected and caring in the stillness imposed by lockdown. These are some of the lumen prints made by participants using nature from their daily walks or their gardens. Lumen prints are created by placing an object onto a piece of photographic darkroom paper and leaving it in the sun to expose. These are pinhole cameras that we made out of aluminium cans, which participants placed in their gardens and environments, and some of their results. And these are soil chromatographs. And to make these, we mixed soil with sodium hydroxide and then filtered the mixture onto filter paper coated in silver nitrate. What you get is a visualisation of the humic content of the soil. At the end of summer 2021, we met for the first time in person. The participants said the project gave them a focus during solitary times, and some of the friendships we've formed have outlasted the making of this work. In Finding the Mother Tree, Professor Susan Simard wrote, "Ecosystems are so similar to human societies. They're built on relationships. The stronger those are, the more resilient the system." During and after the workshops, I've continued visiting the 12 trees. Each time I use the forest floor to make sets of oak leaf lumen prints. As identified in Isabella Tree's wilding, mature oak trees produce around 700,000 leaves every year and then shed them to make mulch and eventually soil, which they use to nourish themselves and their ecosystem. There seems to be no waste in the forest, just nourishment. And so to honour this productivity, care and sustainability, I've created hundreds of lumen prints, trying to consider the distinctiveness of each being. We know that a lot of their communication happens below ground in the root systems, and I've been working with a mini risotron camera to visualise the world beneath the forest floor. In Underland, Robert Macfarlane says, "I think of good love as something that roots, not rots over time, and of the hyphae that are weaving through the ground below me, reaching through the soil in search of mergings. Theirs too seems to me then a version of love's work." When I walked around the village, I saw prints in the windows of our new community, and I thought of our network and how photography and creativity can do the same. Reaching out in search of mergings, and in the smallest of ways, it can be so powerful. The soil houses these connections of the roots and the mycorrhizal networks, and I'm interested in the idea that the soil thrives through simultaneously breaking down and evolving. So as well as scanning the soil, I've been creating soil chromatographs with soil samples from each of the 12 trees. Every time I go, I create journal images to document the forest and its constant ability to change. At first, I was overwhelmed by the space. The ferns were taller than me and I couldn't find a way in. I felt a bit intimidated and I didn't know where to start. Someone suggested writing letters to the trees instead, so I started to do that as a means of connecting further and creating visual inspiration. I've carried on since. Have you been held by a human hand? I took my camera to each of you and looked. Your beautiful bark reptilic, one small piece at a time. Majestic home. I think about the energy moving through you. When I rest against you long enough, it moves through me too. Back, bark. That process really helped me to start walking between the trees and observing, and recently I've made portraits of them and then made plant-based developers from rosemary to develop the filming. I've installed camera traps which show us narratives that are further threading the forest together. This blue tick kept returning to the camera to use spider's webs around the lens to make its nest, and as per the title of the work, taken from Richard Powell's The Overstory, everything in the forest is the forest. I like the idea that the frame remains the same and all forest life enters it from buzzards to bees. I'm going to play a very short clip of some video that happens on the camera trap cameras, and the sound that you can hear is recorded by Dr. Annie Matani when we went to BIFoR this year at the end of March at 4 AM to record the dawn chorus. When a wasp lays its egg on an oak tree, it forms a gall around it, which the wasp grows in and eventually burrows out of. And you can make ink out of these galls, which was used in much of Europe and America to write and record a vast amount of Western history, including documents like the Magna Carta, Da Vinci's drawings and Mozart's music, because it's an indelible ink. And I've made oak gall out of it and used it to paint fallen branches from the trees. And this inspired me to carry on and work with oak gall ink. So my ambition was to publish the work as a photo book, but I've been unable to come to terms with creating a book using paper made from trees. The oak doesn't seem to produce anything it can't consume, and I wondered if I could think of a book in the same way, an object that could be useful and then placed back into the forest with no detriment to it. Supported by Arts Council, I'm collaborating with organic paper maker Danielle Phelps, botanical ink maker Carolyn Morton, and book designer Emily McCauley of Stanley James Press to make the work into a biodegradable photo book. We started by developing paper made from mushrooms and biodegradable ink made from botanical ingredients. And we developed a CMYK scale of inks that could run through an inkjet printer. And this was the colour scale that we got out. The process isn't sustainable yet because the printer isn't fit for purpose, but we did move in the right direction. So rather than doing this, we've decided to make biodegradable screen printing inks. We think it's the first time it's been done. And we're printing them onto mushroom paper. The book will contain screen-printed oak leaves and a selection of the participants' lumen prints. It will be launched at Impressions Gallery in Bradford next May as part of my solo touring exhibition, which we're striving to produce as sustainably as possible. The book will be available to borrow and share in a community-driven distribution system rather than to buy and keep for the duration of the exhibition. Through this process, we're considering the notions of printing, binding, distributing and consuming photo books by working with and learning from nature to craft biodegradable materials, reduce waste and establish a loan service to circulate the book, inspired by nature's networks and sharing economy. The book will be made in a very small print run of 12, making sure we only use what we need. 3 writers will write a collaborative essay on the theme of leaves to be published in the book. When I first started making this work, I looked to the trees to help improve issues of loneliness and isolation in rural areas. Now I look at these oak trees and their ecosystem to inspire change in everything, and I'm endlessly grateful to them and the forest they exist in for everything they've taught me. Thank you.